It is 6 p.m. here in Cairo. Time for the news bulletin, and we'll be starting straight away with the main headlines. Gaza's civil defense agency said that the Israeli strikes killed at least 29 people in the Palestinian territory devastated by war and under a total Israeli aid blockade for 2 months. Civil defense officials said that 20 people have been killed since dawn, including 9 following the Israeli bombardment of a home in Bureij camp in central Gaza. At least 2,326 people have been killed since Israel resumed the strikes in the Gaza Strip on March the 18th, breaking a ceasefire and bringing the overall death toll since the war broke out to 52,418. A group of activists organizing an aid boat for Gaza said that it was attacked by drones in the international waters off Malta as they headed towards the Palestinian territory, accusing Israel of attacking the vessel. The Maltese government said that it responded to a distress call from the vessel and offered immediate support. It said all crew members were safe, while making no mention of an alleged attack. The activist group said in a statement that the armed drones attacked the front of the unarmed civilian vessel twice, causing a fire and a substantial breach in the hull, blaming Israel. The statement added that the Israeli ambassadors must be summoned and answer to the violations of the international law, including the ongoing blockade and the bombing of a civilian vessel in the international waters. The Red Cross warned that the humanitarian response in Gaza was on the verge of total collapse after 2 months of Israel blocking aid to the Palestinian territory. It said in a statement, without an immediate resumption of aid deliveries, the International Committee of the Red Cross will not have access to the food, medicines, and life-saving supplies needed to sustain many of its programs in Gaza. Israel strictly controls all the cross borders into the Gaza Strip and is halting aid deliveries to Gaza on March the 2nd, days before the collapse of a ceasefire that had significantly halted the hostilities after 15 months of war. An Israeli assault in the West Bank city of Tul Karam and 2 nearby refugee camps continued for almost 100 days, with the occupation forces putting up barriers at several entrances of the camps and preventing a return by the Palestinian citizens to the demolished homes in some of the camps. Israel launched an offensive targeting 3 refugee camps of Jenin, Tul Karam and Nur Shams in the north of the West Bank during a January ceasefire in Gaza, forcing the displacement of about 40,000 Palestinians. Meanwhile, a Palestinian journalist who has worked for the international news outlets was arrested by the Israeli forces from the home in the West Bank city of Jenin. Dozens of Palestinian journalists have been detained by the Israeli forces in the West Bank since the start of the Israeli aggression in Gaza in 2023. Israeli occupation troops or settlers have also killed at least 925 Palestinians since then. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Foreign Ministry warned against the Israeli occupation forces' attempts to deepen their offensive in the West Bank. A statement asserted that the Israeli destruction of Palestinian homes, properties and infrastructure in parts of the territory, including East Jerusalem, and forced displacement of the Palestinians are a continuation of the Israeli war crimes in the Gaza Strip. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has said that the offensive would last several months. Syria's interim rulers on Friday announced an airstrike near the presidential palace in Damascus as a dangerous escalation. Earlier, the Israeli occupation forces bombed an area near the palace as Israel ramped up military action in the name of Syria's Druze minority. In a joint statement, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz said that the attack was a clear message to the Syrian new rulers who should not allow the forces to be sent south of Damascus or any threat to the Druze community. Israel has escalated the military operations in Syria since the war in Gaza began, with bombings across the country and ground forces entering the southwest since the former president fled the country. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun has warned all the armed groups not to conduct operations that compromise the country's security or sovereignty. At a meeting of Beirut's Supreme Defense Council, Aoun has vowed to bring all the weapons in the country under the state's authority. A council statement said that the president underscored Lebanon's refusal to be drawn into regional conflicts, highlighting the importance of Palestinian rights without compromising Lebanese stability. On the ground, 5 Lebanese civilians were injured following an Israeli drone attack that hit a fuel station in southern Lebanon, despite that halted the Israeli strikes in Lebanon. The strike came a day after 2 Lebanese nationals were killed and 2 Syrians were wounded in 2 Israeli drone strikes in town of Maisel Jebel. The Israeli military said in a statement that it had killed 2 Hezbollah members. Israel has continued to launch strikes in Lebanon despite the November truce, which sought to halt more than a year of hostilities with Hezbollah that culminated in a heavy Israeli bombing campaign and ground incursion in September. As a round of nuclear U.S.-Iran talks were postponed, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that Iran has to walk away from the uranium enrichment and long-range missile development, and it should allow the American inspectors of its facilities. Rubio's comments underscore the major remaining divisions in talks between the 2 countries to resolve the dispute over Iran's nuclear program, with the U.S. President Donald Trump threatening to bomb Iran if there is no agreement. Pakistan-administered Kashmir called on residents near the border with India to stockpile food as tensions flared between the arch rivals following a deadly attack last month. India blames Pakistan for backing the attack at the tourist site of Pahalgam in Indian-administered Kashmir on April the 22nd that killed 26 men. Islamabad has denied the charge, and the uneasy neighbors have issued a raft of tit-for-tat punitive diplomatic measures. The 2 nuclear-armed countries have exchanged gunfire for 8 consecutive nights. Russian strikes wounded 31 people in Ukraine overnight. Most of the injured were wounded as a result of an attack on the industrial city of Zaporizhia. The details follow. Strikes wounded more than 30 people in Ukraine overnight, a day after Kiev and Washington signed the landmark minerals deal. Ukraine hopes the deal will pave the way for Washington to provide security pledges to the embattled country, which has been fighting a Russian invasion for more than 3 years. 29 people were wounded as a result of a nocturnal attack by the enemy on the industrial city of Zaporizhia. 2 men were also wounded in a Russian drone attack in the eastern Dnipropetrovsk region, with fires breaking out at 2 locations. Russia's defense ministry said that the air defenses destroyed 121 Ukrainian drones overnight, the majority over Crimea, Sea Peninsula, which Russia annexed in 2014. The latest barrage came after the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that the minerals deal with the U.S. offered equal benefits for both sides, even though the accord offered no concrete security guarantees for Kiev. The Ukrainian leader called on his country's allies to ramp up the pressure on Russia, to force it to be quiet and to negotiate. In another development, the Ukrainian Air Force said that Russia launched 150 drones during the overnight attack. The Air Force said that it shot down 64 of them, and another 62 drones did not reach the targets, likely due to the electronic warfare countermeasures. It did not specify what happened to the remaining 24 drones. Minister of Petroleum and Mineral Resources Engineer Karim Badawi said that the Egyptian petroleum sector has huge potentials that enable it to implement mega projects with international standards. The minister's remarks were made during his meeting with the chairman of the Korean Petroleum Association and his accompanying delegation, where both sides reviewed the means to increase the Korean company's investments in Egypt. The Korean guest expressed keenness on expanding his country's investment activities in the country in the sector of petroleum. Meanwhile, the Minister of Planning, Economic Development and International Cooperation, Rania Al-Mashat, who is also the Egyptian governor to the World Bank Group, witnessed the launching of activities of the Growth Academy for the Middle East and North Africa regions. Al-Mashat noted that the launch of the academy was organized by the University of Chicago in cooperation with the World Bank and the Economic Research Forum in Egypt. She added that it reflects the deeply rooted ties binding Egypt and the World Bank over a long period. And this brings us to the end of the news bulletin for today. Thank you for watching and goodbye.